Levent Altan, and I'm the Executive Director of Victim Support Europe.
What does this new law require? What support does it offer to victims and their families?
So the directive introduces a range of new rights for victims. What it means is that victims should receive information on their rights, which is fundamental for what they want. It means that they need to be protected throughout the criminal proceedings so that they're not victimised or harmed further by poor treatment. It means that they should have support services available, so if you're suffering trauma, you should be able to access victim support for emotional care and also practical assistance. And it means that victims should be treated in a respectful and dignified manner, and that they have access to compensation. So there's a wide range of rights it introduces.
This law was meant to come into force across Europe this week. Are you worried that that's not the case?
Well, we know it won't be the case everywhere. There are many member states who are doing a great job and are doing a lot to make these rights a reality for victims. But we also know that there are countries which are doing very little or are just now really waking up and trying to introduce their new laws. And there's a long way to go for many of countries as well. But we have to accept that this is just a start. The process will take a long time. In the Netherlands, Germany, England, they've been doing this for 25, 30 years. So we have to accept that, but we have to see that governments are making an effort and really taking things forward.
How are you going to be continuing to monitor this now? And what are the countries that are not up to the mark yet that you are going to be kind of lobbying to change their attitude?
Well, Victim Support Europe has members across the European Union, so we're going to be working with them to really see how the directive is being implemented in practice through surveys, monitoring, questionnaires, etc. But we're also engaging with governments and organisations at the national level. We know, for example, that there are 8 countries which don't yet have national victim support services, countries like Bulgaria, Romania, Lithuania, Italy. So with these countries, we're engaging with those governments as much as possible, and we're showing them how they can put in place the victim support services, and we're trying to help them as much as possible. The victims' issues are really for all of us to engage in. We really need to help governments to take a step forward and really find solutions, and those good solutions exist from around Europe.
What rights can victims, in this case, in the Paris attacks, expect and their families?
So the tragic events in Paris recently have affected many hundreds of people, not just the people who were there and the witnesses, but also the families and also people who've seen the events. And in both England and in France, there are different services and rights available. So the French authorities have national support services available. So those victims will be able to access and should be receiving support. We're also in touch with Victim Support England, and we know that they are working with the Foreign Office and with the British government to provide access to support for victims, to British victims or victims resident in England. But people should also be aware that there are different rights in France which they can access as victims, including the right to compensation. So the government and Victim Support England needs to work with these victims and really let them know what their rights are, and we will help them engage also with the French authorities about that.
This really coincides with a new European law coming into force this week across Europe. How important is that in underlining the support that victims get, that they're entitled to now Europe-wide?
The directive is extremely important. It not only establishes an obligation on governments to establish these rights, but with respect to terrorist victims, there is a recognition of the need that they have and the special attention that must be paid to victims of terrorism. But it raises the profile of these issues, which can be so easily forgotten actually, and it makes sure that we are able to monitor what is happening and ensure that governments are acting, and it puts the onus on governments to act and to take into account all the different groups of victims and the different needs that they have.
And just briefly, finally, in terms of the Paris attacks, how closely are you following the impact of that on victims and their families? What kind of support is on offer already?
So Victim Support Europe is in direct contact with INAVEM, one of the French victim support organisations which are helping victims. We're also in touch with victim support organisations around Europe which may be involved with victims, such as in the Netherlands and in England. We are seeing already that there are difficulties in helping victims across borders, and in the coming weeks and months we really want to sit down and look at how we can improve the system so that we have a better and faster response, and so that victims don't experience some of the difficulties that they may be experiencing now.